Welcome everyone. Welcome to this Infernalist endgame build guide. It is a uncapped demon form build relying on Pyro Pact and Life Recoup along with a unique chest, which I'll show a bit later. It is, more importantly, by high demand and request, a non-spark variant as well. For those that have been following on my previous videos, there's been a lot of comments asking whether this setup can work for something other than lightning. So as you can see here, this is a cold variant. And in fact, having set this up and in the process of setting this up, it is just actually so much fun. Visually, it's stunning as well. And it's actually highly effective, arguably, potentially even more so than lightning. So I will actually be probably sticking with this going forward. On that note, two quick points I want to mention. This will be a deep dive standalone video for the benefit of anyone that's new. For existing viewers, please stick around though and watch. There have been a few minor points that I've learnt along the way as well, which may help you in your own setups. And especially I'd say in the gems chapter, there's a important point I'll make about cost multipliers on support gems and the impact that has. The other point I'd just really want to ask is please leave a like and a subscribe if you've been enjoying these videos, or if you like this video. It does really help out the channel. Quickly before I dive into details, we'll just let this play out. You could kind of see how I was ramping up my demon form stacks. Got to about 150, and Zesht at the max tier pretty much dies instantly. In fact, the build is so effective on pinnacle bosses that I actually died twice on Zesh because I was doing so many comic criticals that I was killing myself due to proccing Pyro Pact too quickly. So I had to actually remove an energy gem and replace it with a damage gem, and that helped. And as you could see, no problems now. So how does the build work? I talked about a unique chest as well as Pyro Pact. So we'll quickly, Pyro Pact firstly. Very quickly, for those that aren't aware, replaces your mana, completely sets it to 0, and replaces it with a resource called Infernal Flame, which works exactly the same way as mana, except when it hits the max point, it resets and it damages you. How do we combat that? Well, twofold. This unique chest allows our life recoup to also apply to energy shield. So what we do is we stack a whole bunch of life recoup to ridiculous amounts. And what happens is our life recoups when we take that damage, and our energy shield recoups. And those two layers are important to note because when we are going for uncapped demon form, our life degens. So the life recoup portion on our health globe combats the demon form stacks, damaging us, whereas the energy shield recoup that's provided by the unique chest gives us our defensive layer, making the build, during mapping especially, almost near immortal if you've got a top end setup, because as you can see, your energy shield just regenerates, recoups so ridiculously quick. You can see here 5,000 if I really crank it up and pop the life last as well, 7,000, 8,000. And then if you also the damage you take from the mobs adds to that recoup, and you just get a ridiculous amount of recoup. And unless something one-shots you, that's probably the only way you're going to die. So that's recoup, Pyro Pact. Very quick note, some people got caught out. Just a note for existing viewers, some people got caught out. It should be pretty obvious, but max out your resistances. Fire especially. The damage from Pyro Pact is fire based. So if you don't have your max fire, you're probably going to take too much Pyro Pact damage and not be able to recoup it quick enough and kill yourself. But during endgame, anyone that's in endgame should know it is practically mandatory to cap all your resistances going into endgame mapping to T15 and pinnacle bosses and above. So how does this work? You've already seen me pretty much do a demo. You cast your spells, fill out your Infernal Flame, damage yourself as quick as possible, and that ramps up your recoup. Recoup isn't instant, it happens over a period of time, but those that recoup which you trigger can overlap. So that allows all these multiple layers of recoup to overlap to build to very high amounts. So you want to be damaging yourself using Pyropact and Infernal Flame as quickly as possible to stack that recoup as high as possible. On that note, few people struggling, I will stress this is a pretty top end setup, at least what I will show you in terms of my gear pieces and gems and passive tree. To progress to this point, if you are struggling and just simply taking or not being able to stack your life recoup high enough to run the uncapped version of Demon Form, it is completely viable to run the 10 stack limit. You're still going to absolutely crush everything. And then the recoup is just acting as just a very phenomenal defensive layer, as well as and you're still going to have your infinite mana effectively from Infernal Flame. I have no mana issues and as such. So goals. What are the goals of when we're building this? I'll dive into the passives and gear in a moment, but just to give an overall idea. Firstly, number one priority, you want to max out get as much life recoup as possible through your passive tree and gear. Secondly, like I mentioned, may be obvious, but max your resistances. Then you want to get a nice big fat level of energy shield. This chest piece where you normally get a big brunt of your energy shield does not have much. So getting decent values from your helm, boots and focus is important. Gloves you don't get either if you run these gloves, which I'll dive into later. So you really want to high ES values from these three pieces as well as on your passive tree. You want to get high cast speed. I mentioned we want to be triggering or maxing out an Infernal Flame as quick as possible, so cast speed plays into that. Likewise, because we want to max out an Infernal Flame as quick as possible, we want to keep our mana as low as possible. Pyropact got changed in 0.3 where you get 2 times the amount of Infernal Flame as you had mana, so any mana rolls on your gear are going to be significant in terms of bumping up your Infernal Flame. So you want to avoid that if possible. Lastly, everything will be remaining after that, after you have your core setup of your life recoup, an energy shield, cast speed, and be able to trigger Infernal Flame. Everything else is just pretty much flexible in terms of the damage setup you want to take. I've personally gone from a crit setup with using Maligaros, which I'll go over details in a moment. But there are other options. You can go flat damage. You can pretty much do whatever you want. As long as you got your life recoup and the core elements of the build, the damage elements are completely optional and do whatever you want. So, passives. Firstly, the Ascendancy. Pyropact, obviously mandatory. Demon Form, dare say, the whole point of the build is to try and go for an uncapped, really play into an Infernalist archetype. So the 2 Demon Form points, as I said, if you're progressing, the safer option, and it's actually what I did myself, is to run simply the 10 stack default 1 point here. And you can take Green Emulation or one of the reservations instead, and then go uncapped once you have your life recoup really optimized. Lastly, Altered Flesh is just an overall good defensive layer, predominantly for your physical damage. So if you got your chaos damage maxed out at 75%, it's pretty much a 15% physical damage reduction node. If you don't want the defensive layer, you can obviously just go Grinning Emulation, or, well, that's probably the only other option, or maybe Bringer of Flame. Bringer of Flame for more ignites, for more fire infusions, since we're running Siphon Elements, which I'll again go into in a moment. Also, if you go Altered Flesh and you get max fire res points here and there, that also obviously reduces your elemental damages as well. So that's the Ascendancy. Passive tree, rather than going over every single point, I'll highlight the important clusters. Firstly, as I said, life recoup number 1. There is a cluster here. This node being especially high value. There's a cluster up there. This one. Alternative options, like I want to stress, this passive tree is not set in stone. There is flexibility in it, and people have reported on my other videos of going down alternate routes. So I'll highlight some of them. There's a cluster here, and there's actually a very high value cluster also down here, which actually has a multiplicative life recovery rate bonus as well, which is very good. On that point, pretty much mandatory nodes are Soul Bloom. The recovery rate, Energy Shield is a multiplicative multiplier, so this is massive. Likewise, on your Amulet, Anoint, Hail Heart, again, a multiplicative bonus there. In terms of navigating to Soul Bloom, thank you very much. Shout out, I can't remember the name, I apologize. There was a viewer on my previous video which called this out, but a controlled Metamorphosis jewel, don't know if I pronounced that right, with medium small ring. Try and get the penalty resistances as low as possible. I got lucky and got a complete, I believe, without corruption, the lowest rolls there. This cost me, I think, 2 or 3 div, but that allows you to pick up that node without having to waste the 3 points pathing to it, as well as saving 2 pathing nodes to also get sudden escalation if you're going down the crit route. So this is a very good, unique jewel. Thank you again to the viewer that called this out. So that's a life recoup. I think there's another cluster actually here if you go down this path. After that, as I said, really trying to get our defensive layers set first. We are trying to get as many high value max energy shield nodes as possible. The recharge rate and speed at which the faster start means absolutely nothing to us, because our energy shield recovery is completely contingent on our life recoup and the unique chest functioning. So we just want to focus really on max energy shield. This node especially that I've just happened to have highlighted is massive value for us because it also reduces our max mana, which is what we want. There's some good max energy shield nodes here. Very big one up here. If you get lucky with your Heroic Tragedy jewel, which there's some important points to note about this jewel, but if you get lucky with this jewel, there are some 40% max energy shield nodes that you can get from that. And on that note, the reason we take this jewel specifically in this spot is first and foremost convert what is typically Chaos Inoculation here into Nightly Tenants. And to do that, you need a Heroic Tragedy with Line of Olroth. The annoying thing with this jewel in terms of how it changes the notable passives within this radius as well though, is that it seemingly seems to be random. So it's all going to be luck of draw with respect to the seed you get. I'm not sure if the number has any bearing, but some people have reported, I think, that they've even got the exact same number, 57, 59, that I have, and had different notable outcomes. So it is a bit of luck of the draw, but play around with it. You may get the energy shield points somewhere else. I just happened to get one here, just with some good value ailment threshold nodes along the way, and in this cluster here, which is great for the extra projectiles and projectile speed. So be wary with this duel. It is a little bit random, but the main reason we want it, and in this spot with Line of Olrath, is to get Knightly Tenants. And the reason for that is, again, to reduce our mana as much as possible. And this reduces it significantly because, as you can read from the top line, no inherent bonus from intelligence. I believe every point of intelligence gives you 2 mana. And we need, at the top end, to run at about 150 intelligence, or I think 157 at a level 20 gem requirement. So that's about 300 mana times 2 by the Infernal Flame. The Infernal Flame times it by 2. So, you know, we're talking 600 plus, almost twice the amount of Infernal Flame. So this is a big reduction in your Infernal Flame. It is big value. Anyway, rambling on about that. So that's our defensive layers. Lastly, like I said, the last bit is all flex in terms of your damage. I've personally gone for crit. It's a little bit hard to tell because I've got it set on weapon swaps, but I've got crit clusters here, down there, this crit node there. There's some generic elemental damage nodes here, which is good, but also have a crit based bit of extra elemental resistance as well. So, you know, these are actually really nice. I would almost say this cluster here, not crit related. Well, it is crit related, but even more so, this node just gives tremendous value in terms of our trigger meta abilities, which we're actually quite reliant on. So this is almost mandatory, this cluster, I dare say. It gives us a lot of energy generation. Almost mandatory. You could probably work around, have other means getting around it, but very high value. We're going cold, so we get the extra freeze build up from these 3 points because they're easily accessible. If I had the points to spare, or if I really wanted to play around potentially some more, I may try to work around, try and get some of these points, especially plus level of cold skills, because that would actually help in terms of bumping up the mana cost of the abilities even more. So that's something that I might actually do. But at the moment, you don't see it there, because as you can see, this is quite point hungry setup. But I dare say this point actually I may try and work this in. Lastly, we're also trying to get cast speed, which I mentioned. Oh, sorry, another crit cluster here. Some cast speed there, and another very high value node up here, which gives us a big amount of cast speed as well as increasing our mana cost, which again, we want. So that's a passive tree. We've covered the unique jewels. In terms of your leftover jewel slots, I've got 2 spare. Very highly recommend Heart of the Well, is very good value. Firstly, recoup speed, really nice. We're a recoup build. Maximum fire resistance is ideally that maximum cold resistance would be max all resistance, although they're quite hard to find and quite expensive if you do. And then some form of extra fire damage, at least in terms of this setup. Specifically with the cold setup, where I'm specifically targeting extra fire to try and get some more ignite stacks happening to trigger siphon elements, get fire infusions for our comets. And for the last little jewel, or any generic jewels, you'll actually find that attributes are hard to come by in terms of meeting our gem and gear requirements. So some corruptions with some stats is nice, but then recoup, #1 priority on a sapphire, and you can get crit hit and max energy shields. So really pretty much all the points that you see here are really good value for this build. On the same note on attributes, is this node may actually help you out a lot in terms of meeting those attribute requirements. It's a big chunk of intelligence. Likewise, I happen to again be lucky with the heroic tragedy and got plus 15 to strength. It actually really helps here. So even though I'm not doing lightning damage, I'm actually picking up this node simply for the plus 15 strength. So that's the passives. Gear. Firstly, I'll touch upon the uniques. Chest piece, mandatory. The whole build revolves around this chest piece. Luckily, this is, at the moment, very, very cheap. Try and get the recoup. Oh, now I buggered it. Okay, back. Apologies for that, but that actually brings up a good point and a handy tip. So this chest piece has got high stat rolls on it in and of itself, especially strength. So one trick in terms of helping you equip this is sometimes what you do is you'll go and you'll refund a whole bunch of travel stat nodes and set them to strength to meet the requirement to be able to equip this. It then, once equipped, it gives you the bonus strength. And what you do is then you go back and then set them back to intelligence, which is what I just did to fix a little boo-boo that I did. But that does bring up a nice tip for helping to equip this chest and then benefit from the stats it gives itself. But anyway, let's continue on. What you want on this chest is as high a life recoup roll as possible, so it can roll on a range of 5 to 6 on the chest inherently itself. A lot of people make the mistake of looking for a corrupt version of this which rolls this 10 value up to 12. What is actually higher value is to get a corruption which applies the life recoup enchant, which can roll from 10 to 20. So even with a low 6 value here, you can see, for instance, since I've got this enchant corruption, that adds up to 21, which is a lot more than 12. And doing this is actually a lot cheaper because not a lot of people seem to be aware of this at the moment. What you do is you just buy a whole bunch of one Exalt versions of this chest and just slam them with Valors. Make sure you've got the 2 sockets applied and just hope you hit the life recoup. It didn't take me too much time and I actually made money on it because you can still resell the failed attempts pretty easily. So required chest piece. In terms of the current setup that I am running, and I'd highly suggest if you're running crit, or at least in terms of your aspirational goal at the top end, is Maligarrows. This just sets your crit damage bonus flat to 250. So if you can see, if I bring up ability, crit damage bonus 250, and then you can run, I'll dive into the gems separately, but a quick note on why these gloves are so good. You can run pinpoint critical as a support. Typically this has a 30% downside to your crit damage bonus, but you can see here with this socketed, that does not affect the 250 set by Maligarrows. That just hard sets your crit damage bonus to 250. And the reason why these gloves are so good in this build is because, as I said, our passive tree is quite heavy in terms of how many points you have to play around with. So it completely frees up our passive tree and our gear from that point of view as well, from having to find crit damage elsewhere. It's just, you can almost just read this as giving you 150% top on top of your normal 100. It's fantastic. I've personally gone for a 2-socketed version as well to really get the max fire res in the 2 sockets and get most value out of that. It also runs with crit hit chance, so really great gloves. Next thing, gear-wise, before jumping into individual pieces, overall statement, which I'll reiterate from before, do not get any mana if you can anywhere. If you'll see, just kind of quickly going over all my pieces, I do not have a single maximum mana roll anywhere. And that's deliberate to, again, keep our Infernal Flame as low as possible. Next, most important thing after the chest and gloves, if you're looking just to copy what I've done in terms of the crit setup, is to get as high life recoup rolls as possible. So that is 3 pieces in particular: your helmet, This is a desecrated role, or a desecrated mod. The elemental damage taken recouped as energy shield. The pyro pack damage is fire, so elemental damage. And it just gives, it acts as a bonus to our defensive energy shield. Pardon me. So arguably not mandatory because it doesn't affect our maxing out of the demon form stacks, because since it only applies to energy shield, but still very high value. Furthermore, socket a soul core. I won't even try to pronounce that, but there is a soul core for helmets that adds another 6%. Belt, probably the single highest value recoup roll that we can get is on the belt, and this is through a certain essence. I think maybe of the body, don't quote me on that, but it rolls from 26 to 30% fire damage taken recouped as life. So this gives a massive amount. Again, Infernal Flame damage is fire. Lastly, our amulet, and this can roll from, I've only got a T2. I can't remember how high the value, but even so, still, again, a very high roll is possible on your amulet. Furthermore, catalysts, life catalysts to bump it up even further. So that's the life recoup. Next, probably most important thing is plus level of spells on your wand, focus, and amulet. Again, I've got very top end pieces. You can get away with slightly lower values, and I would very highly recommend crafting your wand, crafting your focus, and crafting your amulet. There's plenty of other YouTube videos out there on how to do that. It will save you a lot. For reference, you could probably, this cost me about 2 or 3 div to craft, maybe 4, depending on the prices at the time of the crafting materials. And to buy something like this probably costs 2 or 3 times as much. Likewise for the other pieces. Plus levels, and the reason plus levels is particularly important is the higher level your gem, skill gems are, the more mana costs they incur, and hence the quicker we drain our Infernal Flame, and secondly, the more damage you do from the plus levels as well. So there's a twofold effect, and why it is such an important stat for us. After that, next most important thing is probably cast speed, because again, we want to drain. I'm going to sound like a broken record here. We want to drain our Infernal Flame as quick as possible. So cast speed, huge. You can get it on your wand, you can get on your focus, you can get on your amulet, you can get on your rings as well. I don't have it because it's pretty expensive to get on your rings, and I've just thrown these. I use my ring slots as my resistance solutions first and foremost, so I've just kind of slapped these two together at the moment, but you can get cast speed on your rings. If you don't want to, don't want to be as defensive, you can get cast speed, socket, I think there's soul cores as well, but I believe there's +6 or +8 cast speed. So if you have 2 sockets, you can get a bit of cast speed on your gloves as well. Next thing is crit. You can get high rolls on your wand and your focus, so that would be your number 1 priorities. So your wand and focus are really quite defining at the top end, because they can run, get cast speed, crit hit chance, and plus levels on all 3, and they're all 3 suffixes, so try that. Crit you can also get, I believe, on your helm, crit chance. Again, if you can get a high energy shield, elemental damage taken recouped, plus crit, good luck. That'll be great. Probably quite expensive. I've also gone for, on the quick note on the helmet, I've also gone for a corruption to get plus spirit, so I can run an extra aura, which is frost armor, just for a bit of extra defense, but that's completely optional. Next thing, as I mentioned, I believe early on, this chest piece does not offer us a lot of energy shield, and energy shield is, we want to have a high energy shield value because our life is being degenerated through demon form. So we don't really want to rely on our health as a defensive layer. So energy shield is super important. So high ES rolls on your helm, boots, and focus help tremendously. As I mentioned before, getting max ES in your jewels and on your passive tree helps a lot. Beyond that, other useful, less required, but great if you can get it, is max life. The more life you have, the more damage you take from Infernal Flame, because it's percentage based on your HP and ES, which means the higher recoup values you get. So max life is a good value stat, and at endgame, if you have experience of endgame, rarity is just tremendous. A lot of people will sacrifice on DPS and other stats to get rarity at the top end. That's how you generate good currency. So rarity rolls, you can notice I've prioritized in quite a few places. Boots, lastly, probably a good one to highlight. This is aspirational, but getting a 2-socket exceptional crafted pair of boots, craft yourself with, I won't go into all the details of what these boots are about and how to craft them, find a separate video please, but the key notes here are the increased effect of socketed items, and you can socket recoup speed into the boots. So you can see here 40% extra speed of recoup. Some people have questioned whether recoup speed is important. It's up to personal preference. It doesn't affect your demon form uncapped max stacks as much, because it doesn't, I won't go into the math, but what I find, I prefer to have a faster speed, because during mapping, the reality is you are going to be stopping here and there. You're going to be dodging around to move, and also if you just get hit by surprise by, say, dodging into a pack, the faster the recoup speed you have, the faster that initial recoup of energy shield is going to be, and in general it's just going to improve the speed at which your energy shield recoups and give you a much better defensive layer. So that pretty much covers it. Oh, one quick other point in terms of gear, actually quite important things. This life flask, almost mandatory. It gives you, every time you pop it, it gives you a debuff, a buff for 7 seconds, which gives you 30% even more recoup. So for reference, with all the passive nodes I've got and some good rolls on gear, I'm sitting at 90% plus 20 from elemental. And then these two rolls on the helm and belt don't show up here, but that's a further 28, 19, so it's almost 50. So that's about 160 all up. And then when you pop this life flask and get another 30, it rolls in a range, mind you, so make sure you get the max 30. They're very cheap, these flasks, but we're almost hitting 200% recoup. And in terms of defensive layers, even more so, try and get a belt with 3 charms slots and with charm effect duration. And then on your charms, cannot be stunned, stone charm, thawing charm cannot be frozen, and this unique charm is very handy for giving you again more recoup when you take chaos damage or recoup from chaos damage, so synergizes very well. And quite important on the rolls, or I personally would target this, increased duration and chance to gain charge when you kill an enemy. You're going to be zooming through maps, so you're going to be getting a heap of charges, if you've got this on it, and the duration obviously helps. So it almost gives you 100% uptime on all 3 if you get those rolls. Gems, the fun part in terms of the cold setup. Spellslinger, which actually brings me back to gear very quickly. Mandatory for this build, you need a dueling wand. This, I'll stick with that, mandatory. You could potentially get away with not having one, but it's going to make it even harder for you to drain your top up your Infernal Flame. And the reason for that is Spellslinger, For those that aren't aware, it is a completely free meta ability. Just by casting spells, you gain energy and can trigger, well, it's specifically an invocation. You can invoke a spell for free, which casts instantly with no cast time, gives you extra damage and obviously more mana. So you can see here, if I cast Frostbolt a few times, I've charged up my spell slinger down here. You can see the little 2, sorry, in the bottom right if you can't see my mouse cursor. And then when I click that, it fires off the spell that has been stored in there, which for me happens to be Frost Darts, which I'll get into now. So, dueling one you want for Spell Slinger. In Spell Slinger, I'm running Frost Darts. There are 2 reasons for this. Firstly, it is a low cast time ability, which means that the energy for it charges up a lot quicker, and it allows us to cast this. If you notice, it fires off very, very quickly, which allows us to drain our Infernal Flame very quickly. So that's why this works. I am basically just holding down my left and right mouse button to trigger everything, and you can see how quickly my Infernal Flame, if I go into Demon Form and get more cast speed, you can see how quickly my Infernal Flame caps out. So Frost Darts is very good in terms of a cold spell with a low cast time being triggered by Spell Slinger very quickly. On that note, we also take Boundless Energy to make it trigger even quicker. The second reason Frost Darts is particularly good, as opposed to say something like Comet. Comet will charge a lot slower, but also since we are freezing everything with basically all our abilities, we're generating a lot of cold infusions through Siphon Elements, which I'll touch on in a moment, but we're not consuming them in any way if we're just purely running Frostbolt and Comet. So Frost Darts consumes cold infusions and gets a big boost to damage. So there's a twofold effect: drains our Infernal Flame quicker and gets bonus damage from all the cold infusions we're going to be picking up. And it's just actually a really nice ability overall, and does actually quite a bit of single target damage. So it's great. Running Maligarrows, as I said, pinpoint periodical. You're going to be seeing this almost everywhere. It's just a massive bonus to our crit chance. In fact, you can't see it. This doesn't show the crit chance, annoyingly, but if we have a look at our Frostbolt, we're running very, very high crit as a result of the base crit chance on our cold spells, as well as pinpoint. And lastly, considered casting. Like I said, it's an invoked ability. We have no cast time associated with this really. So this is the highest value damage support that you can get. You could potentially run, what's it called? Wild Shards instead, if you want a bit of an AoE effect. That's another good option. I think it's Scion's Temper. The lineage support, very cheap, is another good option here. Sigil of Power, I won't dive into. Have a look at the max roll guide, but that should be on your weapon swap with a chiming staff. That's strictly for bossing or potentially high density areas. It's worth sometimes slapping that down for a bonus damage. Cast on crit, cold is phenomenal for crit, so this triggers even more. I've thrown in the Comet here. You could potentially throw in another Frost Darts, and I was tempted to do so, but Comets just look cool. And furthermore, as I said, on our Heart of the Well, we've gone for extra fire damage, and I just so happened to be lucky when I was crafting this wand to get a pretty high value extra fire damage roll on it as well. So I opted to go for Comet even more so, not just from the visual fun factor, but also since I do quite a substantial bit of extra fire damage, I find that Siphon Elements, or the fire damage actually through Siphon Elements, generates quite a few fire infusions. So the Comet, which can be infused by fire, actually is just good value. I also got lucky and found this. This is probably too expensive for most people, but this lineage support is just massive multiplier. It just completely flips monster resistances. If you don't have this or can't afford this, I would probably recommend. I'll get to it in a moment. I run temporal chains. Temporal chains just awesome for high density zones, but as a defensive layer. But you could run elemental weakness instead, or you could run both, and then on bosses slap down elemental weakness. But if you've got this gem, you can kind of ignore monster resistances. Considered casting. Again, it's triggered ability, so no cast speed downside, big value multiplier. And then boundless energy, have it trigger quicker, and pinpoint critical again. I was, instead of considered casting, running energy, retention, to have it trigger even more. But actually, as I mentioned, I actually on pinnacle bosses found that it was triggering too quick, and my recoup, even with the ridiculous amount of recoup that I have, it was triggering Infernal Flame too quickly for even my recoup to handle. So I went for more damage. The upside as well of considered casting, back on the Spellslinger point, is it has a cost multiplier involved in it, which means that the Frost Darts, which gets triggered, costs more mana, which again fills out Infernal Flame quickly. And that's an important point I want to make. Now I'll kind of jump ahead to Frostbolt, is some of these gem choices may be a little bit peculiar, but are very, very deliberate. And that is, so we're using our Frostbolt as our trigger for cast on crit, as well as our very fast cast Infernal Flame recoup trigger. The whole aim of whatever ability you use to initiate your recoup is to have it cast as quick as possible, to trigger Spellslinger as quick as possible, and to cost as much as possible. And the way we do this, so if you're running the old Spark setup, I'd probably, if I was going to redo that setup, I would make some changes to that as well. From my old setup in terms of supports, is you want to look for good value in terms of what they provide, support gems, but support gems also with very high cost multipliers. So Unleash is probably the prime example of this. It has the highest cost multiplier at 150%, and it makes a dramatic change to how much mana we consume and how quickly we trigger our Infernal Flame. Likewise, you see I run projectile acceleration here. There is a lineage gem, which is actually better value in terms of projectile speed, but this has a cost multiplier, so I've gone for this instead. And lastly, the last spot is pretty flexible. You could run freeze. There's a whole bunch of other good support gems with cost multipliers. But like I said, I'm actually playing around with trying to generate more fire infusions for comets. So I've gone for ignite, but also 120% multiplier. So multiplier, multiplier, multiplier. And this doesn't have a multiplier, but this gives you the AoE aura effect, which is just super important for mapping in terms of getting a good spread rather than just firing in one direction. Siphon elements I've mentioned a few times. That simply allows us to generate infusions from ailments being applied to mobs. So my setup specifically is generating cold and fire infusions from freeze and ignite. If you're not running the fire infusions, you still may want to go for Comet, as I said, for the fun factor, and it does still tremendous amounts of damage, as you could see on Zesht. But I imagine Frost Darts would work just as well. But even so, you're running Siphon elements to get the cold infusions for your Frost Darts from Spellslinger. Arctic Armor you can only take if you get Spirit on either your Amulet or your Helm. but it just provides a good defensive layer. Once the stacks build up, as you can see here, even without any of my ramp up or demon form stacks, the damage is, it does instantly kill anything that hits you initially. So it protects you from getting swamped, and it's really nice value if you can get it. I won't jump into the supports. Likewise with Sigil, you can look at the guide because it's not too important. Then what I call two supporting abilities, which are tremendous value. Frost Bomb generates more cold infusions while also costing a lot of mana. It has a limit, so bump up the limit, allows you to get 2 cold infusions per cast, and that combined with Echo. So Overabundance and Echo, those two work together. Allows you to cast, 2, and you get 2 cold infusions. There's one there, so you can see 2 cold infusions. Cooldown recovery, because it is on cooldown, and short fuse, because we're going to be zooming and blasting through maps, so we want that to fire off as quick as possible. We don't care about the exposure effect, although it is nice, especially if you're not running, as I said, this lineage support. But yeah, that's the combination. Frostwall is fantastic both for applying damage, even with the nerf reducing damage by 80% if you destroy it within 0.5 seconds. You can work around that if you want, but it has a bigger effect in terms of combining with our Frostbolt. Frostbolt, when it impacts with terrain, does an explosion. So you can trigger that explosion and get a lot more extra damage by putting a frost wall down. You can see all the little explosions going off in the background. Particularly good on higher HP rares and pinnacle bosses. You could see I put it down during Zesh. Veriglass gives us a bit of extra damage. Again, pinpoint critical, more damage. Spell Cascade to get as many walls up as possible. Oh, sorry, wrong button. And lastly, consider casting more damage. These 2 options probably, including pinpoint critical, the only real important one here is Spell Cascade. I won't go into the temporal chains. It is very much a more advanced thing if you want on a weapon swap, but it's got a massive area of effect if you spec it right. Have a look at my passive tree in terms of the weapon swap if you're curious, and it's a massive defensive layer in high density scenarios. So that covers it in terms of gems. Like I said, cost multipliers are massive on your Frostbolt. And that's probably the most important thing to mention. Next, gameplay tips and how to manage your recoup. A lot of people are getting caught out by just jumping into a fight and initiating once they get in it. And what you can see happens, if you keep an eye on the bottom left on my energy shield, if I wait a while for my recoup to drop off, if I fly in and just cast off everything, my energy shield actually drops relatively low, depending on your recoup speed. So mine drops a bit slower, but if you didn't have recoup speed stacked quite as high as I do, I'd imagine you may even creep into your HP. So you can imagine if you're diving into a pack of monsters and just start spamming, your recoup has not stacked to a high enough level yet, plus the monsters damaging you, where you may get caught out and die very quickly because you're self-damaging yourself. Your recoup isn't enough initially to sustain it, and the mobs are hitting you as well. So every time, just before I walk into a map, I'll kind of just trigger just a few recoups off, get it stacking to a point where I can see it recharging quickly. And then the way I've got my keybind set up, I have my Frostbolt on left mouse and Spellslinger on right, and I just, throughout the whole map, with the exception obviously of looting, I will just hold down those 2 buttons and dodge around for my movement. So it'll be like cast, dodge, cast, dodge, cast, dodge. If there's higher density or a rare, sometimes I'll throw down periodically the frost bombs and frost walls. Not only does it give a cool visual effect and kill everything quicker, but it also gives you more damage even on top and more mana consumption. So that's the kind of the gameplay loop. And that honestly actually pretty much covers it. I'll pull up a raw map demo for you guys to look and watch through if you're curious at the very end here. Just to see, very unedited. This hasn't been cherry picked. It's simply the last map I did, just traveling to the tower. So it isn't really juiced up to the max, but it gives you an idea of just a unedited, uncherry picked, raw view of what it looks like to run a map. Thank you all. Thank you for all the engagement from everyone on the previous videos. It's been fantastic. Some massive, amazing suggestions as well, and things that have helped me. So thank you. And once again, like, subscribe, all that jazz, and good luck. Honestly, it's a very fun build. So enjoy. If you need any help or running into any issues, leave a comment. I'll try and be as proactive as I can in answering anything. Enjoy.